Hi everyone, my name is Amanda Chhour. I'm an undergraduate student in the TESOL program here at Hawaii Pacific University, and the title of my presentation is What's Your Problem? Error Correction in Adult ESL Classrooms. So today we're going to be focusing specifically on pragmatic errors, and I'm going to show you an example that actually happened in my class, and we'll talk about what to consider before making a correction and how to do that effectively and what that has to do with learner confidence. In the end, I'm going to connect it all back to the coursework I've done here at HPU and its relation to the world beyond TESOL. So, pragmatic errors. Pragmatics in the linguistic world is referring to how words have different meanings in different contexts. So, what's considered appropriate in one social situation might be inappropriate in another, just as what's polite versus impolite. So, in the situation I'm going to show you, the example is helpful versus hostile. So the context behind this is that my students had to do a role play between a tenant and a landlord where the tenant makes a complaint to the landlord, and I heard my students who took on the role of being the landlord ask, "What's your problem?" And as we know, "What's your problem?" is usually used as a confrontational question when someone doesn't agree with you or you've done something wrong. It's not really used in a situation where someone is looking to help you, right? Or to help your problem. So on the slide here, I have the unfit question and then better options. But error correction isn't just simply that's wrong, this is right. Don't say that. Say this instead. Before you correct a mistake, consider the following. What is your student's goal? Some students are preparing for citizenship or school or ready to join the workforce. Some students are there to build speaking fluency. Some students are doing all of the above, but depending on your student's goal, you need to decide which mistakes have value in being corrected, just as you would decide which activities have value in being assigned. And you also need to consider, is there a risk of miscommunication? Some mistakes don't compromise the meaning of what student is trying to say. Others have a grave consequence if they're misinterpreted. So if a student's message can't be comprehended or is at risk of being misinterpreted, this is an opportunity for effective error correction. But how do you do that? First, negotiate for meaning. So, in the what's your problem scenario, I have to establish what my student was trying to say. And so I asked them, "Are you trying to help the tenant?" And they said, "Yeah, I am." And so I repeated for clarification and I changed it up a little bit. I said, "Oh, so you want to know what's the problem?" And they said, "Yes, I want to know what her problem is." So throughout this process, you have to stay positive and reassuring. And I said, "Okay, well, here are some better options." So I showed them better options, the more polite questions to ask. And I explained to them which context, what's your problem, is used in. But the important thing about staying positive and reassuring is that it ensures that your students feel comfortable with you giving feedback and so that they don't feel embarrassed. But why should I care how my students feel? Why should you care if your students feel embarrassed? Well, you should care a lot because excessive error correction, especially when it's done with a negative tone, can be really detrimental to a student's motivation to learn. They start to feel discouraged and shy away from asking for help because it also communicates the expectation of perfectionism. And then students will be afraid to make mistakes, which leads to an over reliance on translation tools. Now, translation tools are a great supplement in language learning, but it's so easy for students to fall in the habit of overusing them because what happens is that it becomes more about accuracy and memorization rather than building and applying the language skills, reading, writing, listening, and speaking. These are things that need to happen with error correction, but the correct way, the the positive way of correcting mistakes. So instead, teachers should be selective about which mistakes they correct and how they correct it based on students' goals, and again, setting realistic expectations. You want students to be comfortable with making mistakes, so you need to create an environment where students can accomplish that. And so often, adult students, they're so focused on what they don't know yet and every mistake they made in class and how they're going to fix it and how they're never going to make that mistake ever again, which is just not realistic, right? So setting a realistic expectation for your students is really critical for maintaining their passion and motivation and drive for learning English. So, the connection to coursework. I base my teaching philosophy on the sociolinguistic theory of acquisition, which basically states that the environment in which students are learning and the attitude that students have towards the content is critical for how well a student can succeed in the language acquisition process. Compared to students who are uncomfortable in learning English, students who have a supportive environment and have a positive attitude towards the language tend to do really well in the acquisition process, and they tend to rely less on translation tools. And also intercultural communication skills. Some students come from a background where mistakes are punished rather than taken as a learning opportunity. So it's important as an ESL teacher to develop cultural sensitivity and awareness. So beyond TESOL, why is error correction important? Because having a gentle approach towards language learners contributes to people's sense of belonging and motivation to learn. Sometimes people may be tempted to correct a language learner's mistake, and it's very common for fluent speakers to make fun of a language learner for so called silly mistakes. But this can obviously hurt a learner's self esteem, and so being more kind, patient, and understanding goes a long way in creating a more diverse community. Thank you.